Contestant number 4, Larry Harmon. Passing on a tradition. Passing on a tradition. Larry Harmon.
Do you have difficulties giving your speeches? Does it seem like it takes forever for a thought and a word to come together? Have you ever had that speech that just seemed to flow right out? The words almost writing themselves on paper. As I started thinking about ideas for my speech, there was a thought in the back of my mind. It started scratching its way to the top. It was a short climb. But the more I thought about different ideas, the more this thought from the past. It started waving its hand. It started jumping up and down, and it said, tell me, please. My thought originated on December 22nd, 2004. It was a time in my life when I needed to be able to express the thoughts, the emotions, and the feeling of pride that was building up inside me. Because I'm a typical man, and I don't express my feelings very well. That's my wife. As I sat down that night and I put pen to paper, these words just flowed right out. As I was growing up, my father used to take me hunting several times a year. It started at about the age of 7 or 8, and it lasted well into my teens. It was a time for bonding. My father would teach me about nature, about wildlife, and about wilderness. But mainly it was about my father teaching me something that he had been taught. As I grew older, I got a job, a wife, 2 children. I thought I knew everything. But I rarely had time for hunting, and I never had a place of my own to take my young son. But through the years, my father, my older brothers, they continued to hunt. In 2002, my father passed away. My brothers came to me and they said, Larry, there's a spot open on the deer list. Will you take Dad's spot? Now, I wasn't really interested in hunting. It had been several years. But for the sake of my family, the sake of my father, I agreed just to fill that spot. That first year, I found myself having a wonderful time with my brothers as I got back into hunting. We saw a lot of deer. We all took a whitetail buck. Mine was small. We took a whitetail doe or 2. We shot several wild hogs. And we even took some turkey. This indeed was the best year that my brothers had ever had on this deer list. And we were sure that our Father's Spirit was there with us. That second year was just as great as the first. And the third year was shaping up to be just as excellent. It was in the middle of that third hunting season that the landowner granted permission for me to take my then 18-year-old son hunting. Now, he had hunted earlier in the year on some family property, but the chances of him seeing anything were slim. So on the Friday of Christmas break, school let out early, and I called in sick to work. I picked my son up from school, and we headed to the deer lease for an evening hunt. When we got to the lease, I decided I'd put my son in the stand with me so that I could watch him, I could help him, but mainly so that I would be there for him. As bad luck would have it, the deer were not there that day. And at dark, we headed back to camp to rethink our strategies. It was early the next morning, long before sunup. We headed back out to the stand. But this time, I put my son in my brother's stand across the property. And I headed through the woods, across the big field, back to my stand. It turned out to be a bitterly cold morning. And by 9 a.m., I had all I could take. I was freezing my rear off, and I hadn't seen any deer. Most of all, I couldn't let my son down. I had to do something. I thought maybe if I got out and I walked around, then I might be able to push something towards my son. I took off to the gate to drop my heavy backpack. And when I got to the gate, I heard a gunshot come from my brother's stand. The shot didn't sound right. My gut reaction was, something went wrong. I took off running towards my son as quickly as I could. And at the halfway point, I was out of breath. And I called to him on the radio. And I said, "Son, are you okay? Son, are you all right?" He didn't answer. I was in a panic. Continued on as quickly as I could. And as I came around the last corner, and I could see my brother stand through the clearing, I saw my son stumble out. And I rushed up to him. And I said, "Son, are you okay?" He said, "Yes, Dad, I am." I said, "But I called you on the radio, and you didn't answer." He said, "Dad, I shot at a deer." I got so excited, I dropped the radio, and I can't get the batteries back in. I was relieved. My son pointed off in the direction I saw the deer go. And together, I showed him how to track down that deer. And when we found it, I could see the pride in my son's face as he knelt there beside the deer. My son had taken his first deer, and a tradition had been passed on. It wasn't a big deer, but it was a monster buck to him. And like anybody who had just shot the biggest deer of his life, he had the horns mounted on a plaque and hung it up on the wall of his room. And since then, he's bought his own rifle. He's been on several more hunts. And he's always looking for that next opportunity that he can spend time with his dad. As I look back at that time, I realize how the foundations of the tradition were laid. I realize that if you take the time with your children, you show them those traditions and those values that mean the most to you, that all your traditions will be handed down from your children to your grandchildren to your great-grandchildren. Fellow Toastmasters, I ask you, what traditions will your children hand down? And a contest.